The first thing that struck me when I stepped into Aldridge's estate was the silence. Not the gentle kind that makes you feel calm, no. This was the heavy, suffocating sort. The kind that settles over your shoulders until you feel too aware of your own breathing. The polished stone floors shone like a mirror, the air laced with sandalwood and something cold and expensive I didn't recognize. The ceilings climbed so high they felt hostile, like they were designed to remind me I didn't belong here. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that's how I'd felt ever since the marriage contract was finalized. Temporary, replaceable, decorative. My name is Evan Lau, 25, an Omega and a remote content editor. Depending on who you asked, I was fortunate. That's what my mother had sobbed at the wedding, clutching my fingers so tightly they went numb. At least you'll have security now, Evan. He's an alpha. He'll look after you. But standing there, the promise of protection felt nothing like safety. Mr. Alderidge won't return tonight, the housekeeper informed me the moment I arrived, dipping into a polite bow. He's occupied with business matters. I nodded as if I hadn't already expected exactly that. Thank you. I wasn't sure who I was thanking, the staff, the universe, or myself for pretending this arrangement was anything close to love. Because it wasn't. It was a transaction. My family's dying printing company got a lifeline. In exchange, I became Lucian Alderidge's legally bound spouse. He needed an Omega beside him to uphold a certain image, stable, traditional, investor-friendly. And I needed a way out. They told me he had a young son, Milo, 5 years old, quiet, withdrawn. His mother was gone, though no one dared mention how or why. Not Lucian, not the staff, not even the tabloids that followed the Alderidges like shadows. That first night, I unpacked my clothes in the shared bedroom. Of course, my side of the wardrobe was immaculate, untouched, like it had been prepared for a guest no one expected to stay long. Lucian's suits lined the opposite side, arranged with machine-like precision. I reached out and brushed a fingertip over one of the jackets. Smooth fabric, a faint smell of roasted coffee, cedar, and authority. Then I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. A stranger stared back, too pale, too slight, with wide eyes and lips drawn tight from exhaustion. My damp hair clung to my forehead, making me look even younger than I already felt, like a kid dressed up for a life far too big for him. A laugh slipped out, low and humorless. The next morning, I met Milo. He stood stiffly beside the breakfast table, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit to his chest. His black hair stuck out in soft tufts, his eyes round and guarded. He didn't speak, just watched me with the same impenetrable quiet his father wielded like armor. "Good morning," I said gently. "You must be Milo." Nothing. I crouched to his level, trying again. "I'm Evan. I'll be living here from now on. Your father probably mentioned me?" A single blink. Then he turned away and padded across the room, dragging the rabbit behind him. I smiled, even though something in me pinched. "That's all right. I didn't talk to strangers either when I was 5. The housekeeper murmured behind me, "He rarely speaks, sir. Please don't be discouraged." I nodded, even though I was. Days blurred into weeks. Lucian's absence became routine, gone for days at a time, returning only to shower, change, and vanish again. When he did appear, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The staff straightened, the air sharpened, even the walls felt tense. He was striking in a way that made my chest twist. Tall, severe lines, dark eyes that could halt a conversation with one glance. Every time he walked past me, he didn't spare a single look. "Good evening," I would offer, forcing a polite tone. One syllable. Cool. Distant. but still, my foolish heart reacted every time. Whenever footsteps traveled down the long hallway, I caught myself pausing, listening, hoping they would stop in front of my door, hoping he might say even a single word to me. He never did. Oddly enough, it was Milo who softened first. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the wide window bench, a sketch pad balanced on his knees, a blue crayon clutched in his small hand. Sunlight pooled around him like he belonged to it. I eased down beside him. "That's really nice," I murmured. "Is that the back garden?" He glanced at me, slow, cautious, then gave the tiniest nod. It was the first sound I'd ever heard him make. My smile must have looked embarrassing, because his cheeks warmed, and he quickly bent his head, scribbling again like nothing had happened. "Mind if I sit here too?" I asked. He stayed silent, but he didn't scoot away, so I took that as permission. We stayed that way for nearly an hour, me editing an article, him drawing shapes and little scenes that only made sense in the world inside his mind. When I finally shut my laptop, I noticed something new on his page. A small figure near the garden, messy hair, slouched shoulders. "That's you?" I guessed. He shook his head. "That's you," he whispered. Something inside me unraveled, warm and aching. "Thank you, Milo." He ducked his head but didn't move away when I gently brushed my hand over his hair. And later that night, I found his drawing placed neatly on my desk. No note, no explanation, just the picture. The first thing anyone had given me since I'd entered this house. Weeks passed like that, quietly. Breakfasts with Milo, work in the study, helping him choose colors in his books, nights spent alone in a bed too cold for a married man. Then, one evening, everything shifted. I was rinsing dishes when a door slammed, sharp enough to echo. Heavy, determined footsteps followed. "Where is he?" Lucian's voice, low, clipped, already fraying with impatience. The staff stiffened instantly. One pointed toward the kitchen, trembling. I looked up just as Lucian stepped into the doorway. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, tie undone, hair stuck slightly to his forehead as if he'd run a hand through it one too many times. He looked irritated, furious even, though I had no idea why. "You didn't answer your phone," he said, voice like steel. I blinked. I didn't hear it. I was working. I called 3 times. I must have been in the garden with Milo. He stared at me. "You should have told someone." I frowned, confused. "Told them what? That I was spending time with your son?" A thick silence dropped between us. For the first time in months, he actually looked at me, not through me or past me. His gaze traced my face, drifted down to my apron, then back again. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. "I just wanted to know where you were," he said, quieter, almost reluctant. "I've never cared before." The words slipped out before I could grab them back. His eyes darkened, but not with anger. Something else. Something uncertain. Almost regret? Before either of us could speak again, a small voice broke the tension. "Daddy!" Milo stood in the doorway, hugging his rabbit to his chest. Lucian turned immediately, the hard lines in his face softening just a breath. "Daddy will cook today. He made fried rice. It's good." Lucian's gaze flicked back to me, something complicated lingering there. "You cooked?" he asked. I shrugged. Someone had to. He said nothing more, but that night, for the first time in months, he sat down at the dining table, across from me. beside Milo. Quiet, but present. After dinner, Milo drifted asleep on the couch with his head resting in my lap. I stroked his hair gently, and when I lifted my eyes, Lucian was standing in the hall watching us. Our gazes caught. A single suspended breath. His expression was unreadable again, but softer, almost questioning, as if he didn't quite know what to make of what he was seeing. Then he turned away without a word. But later, when I entered the bedroom, his jacket, the very one I'd traced with my fingertips on my first day, was draped over my chair. Cedar. Coffee. Him. That was where it started, the crack in the ice, the first hint of warmth in a mansion that had forgotten what warmth felt like. I didn't realize it then, but something was shifting. The house was getting warmer, and perhaps Lucian was too. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the living room, turning the pale floors gold. Milo sat cross-legged on the rug, carefully stacking his colored blocks. I watched from the couch, hands warmed by a mug of coffee, laptop open but completely ignored. He had changed. Lighter, brighter, more talkative. Last night, he'd even asked me to read him a bedtime story. Small things, but to me, they felt monumental. Every smile from him felt like a door slowly opening inside this once cold house. Milo didn't look up from the tower he was building with his blocks, but his voice was soft. "Can we make cookies today?" I blinked. "Cookies? Again?" He nodded, a tiny grin peeking through. "You burned the last ones." "Excuse you," I said, laughing as I set my laptop aside. "That was artistic charring." Milo giggled, really giggled, and for a moment I just stared. It amazed me how a single child's laughter could warm the entire Alderidge estate. It didn't feel so enormous when he was happy like that. Then the sound of a car engine rolled up the driveway. Milo stiffened. I glanced out the window. A sleek black sedan. Lucian's, unmistakably. "He's home," Milo whispered, shrinking closer to me instinctively. Lucian hadn't been back in 3 days. Every time he disappeared, I told myself I wouldn't care, but the tightening in my chest always proved me wrong. And as I watched him step out of the car, crisp suit still immaculate, phone in one hand, eyes sharp as winter glass, that same tightness returned. The front door opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly, colder, sharper, like the air itself responded to him. Milo pressed closer to my side, and my hand automatically rested on his small shoulder. Comfort first. Always. Lucian's gaze flicked toward us, lingering just a fraction too long. "You're home early," I said, keeping my voice even. He loosened his tie with one hand. "Meeting ended sooner than expected." "Oh." I turned back to my laptop, pretending to type. "There's soup on the stove." I'm not hungry. Of course he wasn't. He never was when the food was mine. Still, a minute later, I heard the faint clink of a spoon hitting a bowl. I hid my smile. That evening, he lingered in the dining room instead of disappearing into his office. Milo and I made cookies, and Lucian sat at the table, not watching us while he answered emails. Every now and then, I caught his eyes drifting over, especially whenever Milo laughed. When Milo got flour all over his hands, I wiped them gently with a towel. The boy giggled again, and I saw Lucian's shoulders soften at the sound before he quickly looked down at his laptop. "Daddy?" Milo called hesitantly. "Want to help?" Lucian froze mid-keystroke. I braced myself for the usual dismissive reply, but he didn't say anything. Instead, after a long pause, he closed his laptop and stood. "I don't bake," he muttered. "That's okay," Milo said brightly. "You can mix." I swear, I almost dropped the bowl in shock. Lucian joined us, the cold CEO, his quiet son, and the Omega he had ignored for months, all standing shoulder to shoulder, dusted in flour like some bizarre family portrait. When his hand brushed mine, reaching for the whisk, a spark shot up my arm. I sucked in a breath. He pulled back instantly, eyes flicking up to mine. "Sorry." "It's fine," I whispered, too softly. Milo didn't seem to notice the tension. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," he giggled. And Lucian smiled. Just a small one, a ghost of a curve, but it was real, and it hit me harder than it should have. Later that night, after Milo fell asleep on the couch, I noticed Lucian standing by the window, silhouetted by the city lights, a glass of wine in his hand, tie gone, hair slightly unraveled, a rare, unguarded version of him. "You've changed him," he said suddenly. I glanced up. "What, Milo?" He didn't look at me. He talks now, laughs. He used to go days without saying a word. He just needed someone to listen. And you listened. There was something heavy in his expression, not coldness, not anger, something else, something almost like regret. "He's a good kid," I said gently. "You should spend more time with him." He looked down at his glass. "I'm trying." "That's good." Silence settled between us, thick, complicated, full of unsaid things neither of us dared touch. Then, quietly, "Are you happy here?" My heart stuttered. Of all the things he could have asked, "I'm fine," I lied. He nodded like he knew it wasn't true. Then he stepped closer, fingers reaching up to brush something from my hair, a small streak of flour I hadn't noticed. His touch lingered just a moment too long. My breath caught. He withdrew abruptly. "Good night." And he was gone again. But this time, the emptiness he left behind didn't feel as cold. The days that followed were full of small shifts. Lucian came home earlier. Sometimes he'd ask if I'd eaten. Sometimes he stood silently in the doorway while I read Milo a bedtime story, just watching us, an unreadable shadow. One evening, I came back from the grocery store and froze in the doorway. Lucian was on the couch, Milo fast asleep on his lap. Lucian's hair was messy, tie undone, exhaustion softening his features. "He waited for you," he murmured. "Wouldn't sleep until you came back." Something twisted in my chest. "You stayed with him?" I asked quietly. He nodded. Didn't want him thinking I'd leave too. The word "too" echoed between us like a bruise. I didn't ask what he meant. I just whispered, "Thank you." He looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to thank me for being his father." But we both knew I wasn't thanking him for that. The staff whispered that the estate felt warmer lately. I laughed it off, but they weren't wrong. Something was changing, slowly, carefully, dangerously. Then one night, it happened. I was working late in the study, half asleep over an article edit when the door creaked open. Lucian stood there, sleeves rolled up, top buttons undone, shadows beneath his eyes. "You should sleep," he said. "I'm just finishing this edit." He stepped closer. "You've been staring at that screen for hours. Work helps me think." He huffed a quiet laugh. "You're stubborn." "And you're—" But the words died when I realized how close he was. The scent of cedar wrapped around me. His hand braced against the desk beside mine, leaning in just enough for his warmth to brush my skin. A heartbeat of silence. Then his voice dropped, low and quiet. "You really don't care, do you?" "About what?" "That I come home or not. You used to wait up for me. That was months ago. And now? Now, I stopped expecting anything." The silence between us crackled. Lucian's jaw tightened, not in anger, but something that looked disturbingly like hurt. "Good," he said finally, his voice betraying him. "Maybe that's better." He turned away, but paused at the doorway. "Still." His voice softened. "Don't stay up too late." When he left, my pulse wouldn't slow, not from anger, from something far more dangerous. That night, I dreamed of him, of his hand brushing mine, of his eyes softening, of Milo's laughter ringing between us. And when I woke, heart pounding, I realized something terrifying. I was falling for Lucian Alderidge. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The estate was quiet, gray light streaming through the curtains. I went to make coffee, trying to steady my thoughts. I nearly jumped when a low voice spoke behind me. "You always wake up this early?" I turned. Lucian stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Sweatpants, a black hoodie, hair damp from a shower. It was the first time I'd ever seen Lucian dress so simply. Gray sweatpants, a black hoodie, hair damp and unstyled. Almost ordinary. And somehow, that made my pulse skip. "I couldn't sleep," I murmured. He stepped closer to the counter. Neither could I. The kitchen smelled like roasted coffee beans and clean soap. He reached for a mug just as I did, and our fingers brushed. The soft jolt traveled straight up my arm. This time, he didn't pull away. "You take it black, with way too much sugar." His mouth curved, almost a smile. "Figures. What's that supposed to mean?" "That you're too sweet for anything bitter." I froze. It sounded casual, careless even, but his tone wasn't. It was warm, faintly teasing, with something softer hidden underneath, something that made my defenses crumble. Later that afternoon, Milo and I went to the park near his school. He ran happily across the grass while I edited articles on my phone. A few parents recognized me. One of them, a young alpha journalist I'd worked with online, walked over with a friendly wave. "Hey, Evan, didn't expect to see you here," he said. We chatted briefly, nothing more than polite professional conversation. But Lucian's car pulled up right then. Milo ran to him immediately, shouting, "Daddy!" Lucian's eyes flicked from Milo, to the journalist, to me. He didn't say anything, but the sharpness of his gaze said enough. When the man finally waved goodbye and walked off, Lucian approached with his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Old friend?" he asked, too casually. "Colleague," I corrected, watching Milo chase pigeons. Lucian's jaw tightened. "He seems comfortable with you." I turned to look him full in the face. "Is that a problem?" He met my eyes. No. But the word sounded like a lie. Silence stretched between us. Then he exhaled, tension loosening in his shoulders. "You have a life outside this house," he said quietly. "I forget that sometimes." "You barely see me," I said softly. His expression flickered. Guilt, maybe, or longing he didn't know how to express. Something fluttered in my chest. Hope, or something far more dangerous. That evening, thunder growled over the city. Milo had already fallen asleep by the time the storm burst open. I stood by the balcony, watching rain smear silver lines across the glass. Footsteps approached behind me. "You'll catch a cold," Lucian said gently. "I like the sound of rain." He stepped close enough that I could sense the warmth of his body behind me. So do I. For a moment, we just listened. The steady rush of the storm, the hollow ache inside the quiet house. Then his voice, low and almost broken. "I used to think silence was peaceful, but lately it feels empty when you're not in it." My breath hitched. "Lucian!" He turned me by the shoulders, slow and careful, until I faced him. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were warm, almost tender. Tell me something, Evan." His voice dropped. "If I'd been different from the start, if I'd tried, would you have tried too?" I swallowed. "You didn't want me to." "I was afraid to," he whispered, the sound nearly lost to the rain. "I didn't know how to love anyone without breaking them." I stared. "And now?" "Now, I'm afraid it's too late." His hand lifted, hesitating midway, a silent request. I didn't move away. His fingers brushed my cheek, soft and trembling. Rain and cedar wrapped around me like a memory I'd never lived. For the first time since our wedding, I didn't feel like a stranger in the Alderidge estate. I felt seen. Then, just as the storm's rhythm filled the silence, his phone buzzed softly on the counter. Lucian glanced at it, a shadow passing over his expression. Brief, almost imperceptible, like a flicker of old worry. He tucked the device into his pocket without a word. I noticed the change, the subtle tension, but didn't ask. It wasn't the right time. "I don't know what this means yet," I whispered. "Then let me find out," he murmured. Thunder filled the silence that followed. When his forehead touched mine, it wasn't a kiss, just a quiet promise, fragile and real. Later, I sat beside Milo's bed watching him sleep. The world felt lighter. Nothing had truly changed, and yet everything had. Lucian passed by the doorway, paused, and offered a faint smile before turning off the hall light. "Good night," he whispered. My heart beat too fast for such a quiet house. Maybe it was foolish to hope. Maybe morning would bring back his coldness. But for the first time, I wanted to believe something inside him was thawing. I woke to the smell of toast. That never happened here. When I stepped into the kitchen, Milo sat on the counter swinging his legs while Lucian flipped eggs in a pan. He looked up when he heard me, and was that a grin? "Morning," he said, like it was something he said every day. I leaned against the doorway. "Since when do you cook?" Milo puffed his cheeks. "Daddy burned 2. Lucian chuckled. 3. Don't listen to him." He slid a plate toward me. "Eat before work starts." I sat, stunned and touched. The eggs were slightly overcooked, the toast uneven, but to me, it tasted like peace. "Thank you," I whispered. "You've been feeding us for months. I thought I'd return the favor." "Us." The word hit deeper than I expected. Later that week, Lucian suggested something I thought he'd never say. "Let's go out. All 3 of us." Milo dropped his spoon in shock. I blinked. "Out? You mean outside the gates?" Lucian nodded. "There's a small amusement park by the river. Milo's never been." Milo's eyes sparkled. "Really, Batty?" "Really." So we went. The afternoon sun was warm. The air smelled of popcorn and caramel. Milo ran from ride to ride, laughter bright enough to soften even the hardest faces around us. When I saw him cling to Lucian's hand during the carousel, something in my chest ached, something hopeful and bittersweet. They looked like what we could have been all along. When Milo darted toward the cotton candy stand, Lucian turned to me. "He hasn't laughed like that since—" He stopped. "Since she passed," I finished quietly. He nodded, pain flickering across his face. I thought keeping distance would protect him. Instead, I made him forget how to smile. "You're trying now," I said softly. And for once, he didn't look away. That's what matters. His gaze lingered on me, steady and unguarded. "You always make it sound simple," Lucian said quietly. "Maybe because love should be." The words slipped out before I could bite them back. His eyes softened, just a fraction, but he didn't answer. On the way back to the Alderidge estate, Milo fell asleep in the backseat, small fingers still sticky with sugar and joy. The city lights blurred through the glass like smudged stars. Lucian drove slower than usual, the hum of the engine low and thoughtful. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For today. For being here." He hesitated. "Every time I see him with you, I remember what warmth looks like." I turned my face toward the window to hide the heat climbing up my neck. "You don't have to thank me for caring." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Then what should I do?" "Just keep trying." His hand rested on the gear shift. Mine was nearby. Our fingers brushed, just once, but long enough that neither of us moved away. A few days later, Milo brought me a drawing, the three of us holding hands beneath a crooked sun. He'd written in bold, wobbly letters, "Daddy plus Evie plus me." When I showed it to Lucian, he stared at it longer than necessary, something tight and shimmering gathering in his eyes. He placed the drawing on his desk as if it were a fragile heirloom. "Do you realize," he said softly, "you've changed everything here?" I shook my head. "It wasn't just me." "It was enough," he said. Then, after a pause that felt like a held breath, "Evan Lau, stay. Not because of the contract. Stay because you want to." I met his gaze, steady and sure. "I already am." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes, fully, unmistakably alive. That night, I found him dozing on the couch in the living room, the soft patter of rain brushing the windows. I draped a blanket over him, moving quietly, but before I could step back, his hand caught mine. Not tight, just a sleepy plea. "Don't go," he murmured, barely conscious. I froze, then lowered myself onto the couch beside him. His fingers loosened, but didn't let go. Rain filled the silence in gentle waves. Somewhere upstairs, Milo shifted in his sleep, dreaming. I looked at Lucian's peaceful face and thought about how different the Alderidge estate felt now. No longer a cold palace of marble and echoes, but a home built piece by fragile piece. Maybe this was how love really began, not in declarations, but in simple breakfasts, tentative touches, and hands that finally stopped letting go. The next morning should have been ordinary, but the air carried a nervous kind of quiet. Milo hummed over his cereal. Lucian lingered by the window, coffee untouched, staring out like the day was heavier than usual. "I'm taking the day off," he said. I almost dropped my spoon. "You never take days off." "I know," he replied, with a small, uncertain smile. "That's the problem." There was something decisive in his tone, something final. I didn't push, but my pulse refused to slow. I noticed his phone buzzing quietly on the counter. A name flashed that made his jaw tighten for a moment before he silenced it. Ariella's family. They'd begun reaching out privately. Warnings, thinly veiled threats, questions about his role in her death. He didn't tell me, but the tension lingered in his posture, in the way his fingers tapped the steering wheel on the drive north. We ended up at the hill overlooking the river. Low clouds drifted lazily, reeds bent under the wind. Milo ran ahead, chasing a paper plane through the grass. "This was her place," Lucian said beside me. I didn't need to ask who "her" meant. She liked watching the city from up here. After she died, I stopped coming. I thought avoiding this place would help me forget, but it only built walls. Another breath, sharp and tired. And then I built more around myself, around Milo. I listened, quiet and still. "I married you because it looked practical. But every time I saw you with him, every time you smiled, I started to hate myself for the way I treated you." The wind tugged at my hair. I didn't step away. He continued, voice raw. "I wanted to say it here, because this is where I let go of her today." He turned to me, eyes stripped bare. "And where I want to start something new." "Lucian." He shook his head. You don't owe me forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I see you now. Really see you. Sunlight broke through the clouds, brushing the edge of his face. He stepped closer. I keep thinking you'll vanish if I reach for you, but I'm tired of being afraid. His hand hovered near mine, trembling. I closed my fingers around his. The world shifted. Small, quiet, monumental. I'm not asking you to love me right away. Just don't give up on what we could be. I searched his eyes. I never stopped wanting to believe in you. I just stopped believing you'd ever try. Then let me prove it. Below us, Milo's laughter echoed up the hill, bright and perfect. It felt like the world was giving us permission. That night, the estate glowed with a gentle warmth. Milo drew another picture, 3 people holding hands under a star-lit sky, and taped it above the kitchen counter. Lucian made tea and handed me a cup, our fingers brushing again, deliberately this time. To new beginnings, he said. I smiled. To learning how to stay. Milo peeked from the hall, clutching his stuffed bear. Daddy, story time? He asked sleepily. Lucian glanced at me, hopeful, unsure, waiting. Together, I said. We followed Milo to his room. As he drifted to sleep between us, a small hand held in each of ours, I realized the distance that once filled the Alderidge estate had disappeared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later, on the balcony, rain began again, soft this time. Lucian stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. You said love should be simple, he murmured. I nodded. Maybe it is, he said. Maybe it's just holding on when it's easier to run. I leaned into him, resting my head briefly against his shoulder. Then we'll keep holding on. Below us, the city shimmered, endless and alive. For the first time since our marriage began, I didn't feel trapped by the walls around me. I felt at home. 3 months passed since that day on the hill. The seasons had shifted again, early spring blooming along the fences of the estate. My mornings were different now. The sound of laughter had replaced silence. Milo liked helping me make breakfast. Helping meaning spilling half the flour on the counter. And Lucian, he didn't leave before sunrise anymore. Sometimes I woke to find him still in bed, eyes half open, watching me like I was something precious he still couldn't believe he had. The man who once felt like an ice wall now carried warmth everywhere he went. Still, a part of me feared it might vanish one morning like mist after rain. The tension returned the next week. Private threats, anonymous calls, cryptic emails reminded us that Ariel's family still blamed Lucian for her death. At first, I tried to push it aside, but then the news broke, a press conference. Ariel's family publicly accused Lucian of foul play. Reporters swarmed the estate, live streams went viral, and anonymous accounts began targeting me directly, claiming I benefited from Ariel's death. Investors panicked, the company teetered. Even Milo asked quietly, trembling, "Daddy, are they mad at you?" Lucian's jaw tightened, dark eyes flicking to me. "We'll get through this," he said, voice low but steady. We barricaded ourselves inside the house. Cameras flashed constantly, drones hovered over the garden, and online accusations piled up. I felt fear claw at my chest, but Lucian never let go of my hand. It was raining the night the chaos peaked. I found him standing on the porch, drenched, shoulders rigid. I approached slowly. "Why are you doing this again?" I asked, voice trembling. "Why shut me out every time something hurts?" He looked up, rain dripping from his lashes, eyes sharp with strain. "Because I don't want to fail you, or Milo, or anyone." "You're not failing. You're running, I said. He flinched. Do you think we need perfection? We just need you. The man who makes pancakes on weekends. The man who learned how to say sorry. His jaw tightened, trembling. I was scared, he admitted, voice low. The moment I realized I loved you, I became terrified of breaking you again. You won't, I said, squeezing his hand. Not if we face this together. He hesitated, then pulled me into a desperate embrace. Rain soaked through our clothes, but it felt like the first honest breath in weeks. The next morning, Lucian faced the press. I stood beside him. Together, we answered questions, corrected false statements, and presented the evidence proving Ariel's death was an accident. No foul play involved. By midday, the stock stabilized. Investors calmed. Social media began retracting false accusations. Ariel's family, confronted with the truth, went silent. Milo peeked off from behind me, his small hand clutching mine. Daddy, it's okay now? Yes, Lucian said softly. It's okay.
That evening, Lucian made breakfast. Milo looked at him like he was a superhero, returned from a long journey. We ate together, and when Milo ran off to grab his backpack, Lucian caught my hand beneath the table. I don't ever want to go back to who I was, he said quietly. You won't, I answered. We've both come too far. He nodded slowly. I'm still learning how to love, right? But thank you for staying, even when I made it hard. I smiled. You were worth the wait. And for the first time, he didn't look away. A year later, Milo's laughter echoed through the park. He ran across the grass chasing a bright, fluttering kite, its string dancing behind him. Lucian sat beside me on the picnic blanket, a rare softness settling over his features. I said, he's changed. He's happy, Lucian corrected. Because of you. I turned toward him, sunlight glinting in his dark hair. Because of us. He reached over and brushed a thumb along my cheek. You know, he said quietly, the day we married, I thought I'd never love anyone again. And now I can't imagine a single day without you. I laughed softly, leaning my head against his shoulder. That's dramatic. You love dramatic, he teased. Maybe I do. Maybe love was supposed to be like that sometimes. Messy, unpredictable, stubbornly beautiful. Milo came running, crashing into us with all his small boy energy. We tumbled together, laughing, grass stuck in our hair, and it felt, for a moment, like everything. The pain, the distance, the chaos had led us right here. Home. Later that night, after Milo fell asleep, I sat again on the balcony. The air was warm, the city humming in the distance. Lucian stepped behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. Us, I said. How far we've come, and the life we're building. His chin rested on my shoulder. Then think about where we'll go next. I pressed a hand to my stomach. Next, there's a new little heartbeat joining us. Lucian's fingers froze briefly, then tightened around mine. We'll face it all together, he whispered. I turned to meet his gaze. The eyes that once held only distance and frost now held quiet devotion, steady, certain, unshakable. We stayed like that for a long while. No words, no fear, just breath, heartbeat, promise, and hope. Some stories don't end with grand declarations. Some end with peace. And this was ours.
If you enjoyed the story, please comment, like, and subscribe so you'll get notified when part 2 comes out.